The Democratic Policy Committee in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, and the Republican Senator from Oklahoma, Tom Coburn, welcome to both of you. Well, Congress gets back to business this week, back to the agenda, but there's going to be a new piece. On the cover of the Week magazine, kind of summed up where this debate may be going, locked and loaded, guns, politics, and the Tucson tragedy. And I want to read Senator Schumer something that the president of the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence said in the wake of the Tucson shootings. I'll put it up on the screen. Enough is enough. Tucson shooter, Arizona, new faces of weak gun laws. The 22-year-old shooter in Tucson was not allowed to enlist in the military, was asked to leave school, was considered, quote, very disturbed, according to former classmates. But that does not that's not enough to keep someone from legally buying as many guns as they want in America. Arizona is one of only 3 states that allow residents to carry loaded, hidden guns without background checks. Arizona recently weakened its laws to allow guns in bars. In addition, if Congress had not allowed the assault weapons ban to expire in 2004, the shooter would only have been able to get off 10 rounds without reloading. Instead, he was able to fire at least 20 rounds from his 30-round clip. Senator Schumer, must government do more on gun safety in the wake of this tragedy?
Well, I think so. But first, let me say that I certainly agree. I want to begin this on the same note that your last interview with Senator Gillibrand ended. We should all be, we believe in discourse in America and spirited discourse, but we have to keep it civil. And I think that Tom Coburn and I are good examples. We've worked together on legislation that we've disagreed with. The 9/11 bill, which passed, it had to be changed, but it passed. And even on the issue of guns, earlier on, several years ago, we worked together on trying to tighten up the record system so that if you were adjudicated mentally ill, you couldn't buy a gun. So I think we can make progress. And let me say this on guns. There are certain things that can be done that don't even require legislation. After Jared Loughner was interviewed by the military, he was rejected from the Army because of excessive drug use. Now, by law that's on the books, he should not have been allowed to buy a gun. But the law doesn't require the military to notify the FBI about that, and in this case, they didn't. So I, this morning, am writing the administration and urging that that be done, that the military notify the FBI when someone is rejected from the military for excessive drug use, and that be added to the FBI database.
What about the number of rounds, Senator Coburn, the ammunition clips? There are lawmakers who have already introduced legislation that would limit those the way the assault weapons ban did. Is that where the debate ought to go?
I don't think so. You know, I think we're missing a bigger problem. We have a obviously unstable person who multiple times in encounters in different levels in our society, people worried about. He was pushed back rather than somebody intervening and helping this individual. And so we need to make sure that we fix the right problem here. And one of them is mental health. And how do we put our hands around people who are so disturbed? If you read all the reports on Jared Loughner, is almost every encounter he had with people were concerned about him. And yet nobody grabbed hold of this young individual and said, you need to be helped, you need to be taken under care. And then had he been, he would have been reported and never been able to buy
Well, that's
again.
the question, though. The reporting aspect of this, Senator Schumer, you just talked about it. Even the community college in Tucson, Pima Community College, they recognize a mental health problem. They saw it as a problem for their community, and they discharged him from the school. They kicked him out of the school, but then there isn't a follow-up for the broader community that would then lead a gun store to ask some follow-up questions, to connect the dots.
Yeah, I think there are 3 areas we can look at, and there's a possibility we could get bipartisan cooperation on these. The first is, as you mentioned, looking at the laws of somebody who is mentally ill, who is clearly disturbed in terms of them getting a gun. And as I said, a few years ago, a mentally ill person, someone adjudicated mentally ill, that's a little different than in Loughner's case, shot a priest and a parishioner of a parish on Long Island, and we tightened up the law. We worked with the NRA, actually. Tom Coburn was involved, and the law is tighter now and better, but probably this is an area we need to explore. Second, the military notifying people who are rejected because of excessive drug abuse. And my belief on the clips, I was the author of the law in the House, Senator Feinstein in the Senate, to limit the clips to 10. I spoke with Senator Feinstein this week. She's recuperating from surgery, minor surgery, and we're going to look at that again. In the meantime, Senators Lautenberg, Congresswoman McCarthy have introduced a bill in that regard, and I hope that might move.
Senator Schumer, I have to say, I detect some caution from you on this, that it might be the right direction, but you don't really expect much traction here. It's not the normal enthusiasm I would expect from you on this issue.
Well, look, twofold. First, we want to be civil in the debate, so we're making every effort here. Second, and respecting somebody's views who are different than ours. Second, look, let's be honest here. There haven't been the votes in the Congress for gun control. We've had some victories. The mental illness bill that I mentioned, there was a proposal by Senator Thune that said if you had a concealed carry permit in one state, you could walk into another state. So laws like Arizona, someone could buy one there and come into New York and not even notify the police. That was defeated. But make no mistake about it. The changes are hard. Senator Feinstein tried to bring the assault weapons ban back on the floor, and it didn't pass. So we're looking for things where we can maybe find some common ground and get something done.
Senator Coburn, look, the politics are tough on this, and Senator Schumer reflects it because Democrats know it's a difficult fight. Look at the public attitudes about stricter gun control measures just since 1990. At that point, we have a graph we can show you. 78% favored it, down to 44% in 2010. That being the case, even as a supporter of gun rights, as Congresswoman Giffords is, can you not look at areas of access to weapons, but also looking at limiting the scope by these magazine clips and say there may be something that's common sense here?
Well, again, I would tell you that let's say you pass that. If you have somebody that is a criminal that wants to get around the law, they're going to get around the law. The problem with gun laws is they limit the ability to defend yourself, one, but number two is the people who are going to commit a crime or going to do something crazy aren't going to pay attention to the laws in the first place. And there's numerous examples over the last few years where concealed carry has in fact benefited people, especially for example, in Colorado Springs, where an individual with a concealed carry stopped somebody who was going to kill multiple people in a church and wounded them so that they could not continue to do that. So it's a controversial issue. The fact is, I would go back, let's fix the real problem. Here's a mentally deranged person who had access to a gun that shouldn't have had access to a gun. Now, how do we stop that? And there's a hole in what we need to do, and I'm willing to work with Senator Schumer and anybody else that wants to make sure people who are mentally ill cannot get and use a gun.
Just one more on this, Senator Schumer. What about the security aspect of that and self-defense? I mean, there are members of Congress in the House who have said when they go out to similar kinds of constituent meetings, they're going to bring a gun. It was former member DeLay said this week on Hardball on MSNBC, he'd be happy with people with concealed weapons so that anyone who wants to try something would understand that they're going to defend themselves. Is that the appropriate response?
Well, let me say this. There is a right to bear arms. It's in the Constitution, and you can't ignore it, just like you can't ignore the others. But like all the other rights, it's not absolute. First Amendment, we have laws against pornography. You can't scream fire falsely in a crowded theater. And there should be limits on gun laws as well that still protect the individual's right to bear arms. And just one point about your little survey that showed that the support went down. One of the reasons is because of the success of gun control laws. The Brady Law has been a huge success. Gun violence went down. The number of people killed by criminals who had guns has declined. And so to me, it's a vindication that smart, rational gun control laws that protect the right to bear arms but have reasonable limits are the way to go.
I want to talk about a few agenda items for Congress getting back to session, but I do want to ask about political discourse and where this conversation should go. Ron Brownstein writes in his column in the National Journal this week, a column that's entitled Apocalypse Always. And here's a point that he makes in conclusion of the piece. When political arguments are routinely framed as threats to America's fundamental character, the odds rise that the most disturbed among us will be tempted to resist the governing agenda by any means necessary. Is that the real problem, Senator Coburn? Is a description of political discourse and political disagreement as being apocalyptic, having such huge consequence for the direction of the country?
I think that's a false premise totally. Everybody has tried in the media. I've pretty well been disgusted with all the media, right and left, after this episode, because what it does is it raises and says that there's a connection. And the president rightly said there was no connection to this.
But that's not what
political discourse to this event.
That's not the premise here.
What he said was.
But Senator Coburn, you know as well as I do that there are people, and it is true that it's very often on the right, who describe President Obama as somehow an outsider who is trying to usher in a system that will do two things: that will injure America and deny them of their liberty. Do you condemn that belief and try to reject it? I'm not making a sweeping generalization. I'm certainly not tying it to the event. That in and of itself is a strain of thought. Is it not?
Well, there's no question. There's all sorts of strains of thought. The problem I have with the premise, David, is that we're disconnecting what the real problems are in our country. And we're spending all this time talking about political discourse rather than talking about the real risk to our country, which we need to quit paying attention to what all the media says. We need to start watching, as Chuck Schumer has said, what we say.
Okay, but Senator Coburn, it's fine to take on the media, and a lot of people would support you in that. That's fine. But I asked you a very specific question. Do you reject those who believe that the president wants to injure the country and that will deny Americans liberty? And do you think violent metaphor of any kind is simply over the line in political discourse?
Of course I reject that. But the point is we're spending all this time talking about something that it has nothing to do with the events, and what the real problems are, we're not spending time working on.
Senator Schumer, is that a fair point?
Do you agree?
Senator Coburn said that this is a false premise that I've introduced?
Well, let me say this. I think that, violent discourse in political life, right, left, or center, is wrong and should be rejected. But I do think we as elected officials have an obligation to try and tone that down. And if we tone it down, then maybe the media will be less vociferous. Let me give you one example. My colleague, Senator Mark Udall, called for Democrats and Republicans to sit together at the State of the Union. I called up Tom after he did that, and he graciously agreed we're going to sit together Wednesday night at the State of the Union, and we hope that many others will follow us. Now, that's symbolic, but maybe it just sets a tone and everything gets a little bit more civil. We believe in discourse in America. We believe in strenuous discourse. We don't sweep differences under the rug. Tom and I have real differences, but we can do it civilly. I will say to Tom's credit, we have disagreed on a whole lot of stuff, but he's always been civil. He's always been a gentleman. And that's an example that people should follow, politicians and the media.
So, Senator Coburn, about sitting together, assuming you're on board with that as well, that is symbolic. But then what message do you hope that sends? And how do you make this a moment that transcends this particular time when everybody's got Congresswoman Giffords on the top of their mind?
Well, I think the key, David, is people go back to motive. And what we can't question is our president's love for our country, Chuck Schumer's love for our country. And where we get in trouble is when we start looking at motives rather than differences of ideology. And I think where we've had problems in the Senate, it's been small, but the fact is that always comes about under when people are questioning their motives. I think the people in the Senate love this country. We have vast differences in how we believe what will be the best course for our country. But I believe the question of motives is something that ought to be set aside. We don't have the Lincoln-Douglas debate. Some of the problems in our country is we talk past each other, not to each other. And Chuck and I have been able to work on multiple bills because we sit down one-on-one and work things out. And what we need to do is have more of that, not less of it.
Can I just ask you both, we just have about a minute left. I just want to get a couple of issues in here and get your comment on them.
In 1 minute.
Well, about a minute. I'm just trying to say a little bit briefer here. As the agenda moves forward, there is health care repeal that's on the agenda in the House. Senator Coburn, Harry Reid has said this is an exercise in futility. You're a doctor, of course. You've paid careful attention to this. If repeal is not possible, what change do you think can be reasonably made to health care reform?
Well, I think we ought to try to repeal it because we ought to build the basis that we've gone in the wrong direction to solve the real problems in health care. The real problems in health care is it costs too much, and what we've done is expanded the coverage but haven't worked on the cost, and we haven't allowed any market forces to do it. So even though Senator Reid says it's not going to get a hearing in the Senate or get to the Senate floor, the fact is we're not through with the debate on health care in this country, because I think we've gone, as a practicing physician, we've lessened the impact between doctors and patients with this bill. And the most personal of things in the country is going to be taken over and managed to a degree that should never be by those that are not involved in the doctor-patient relationship.
Senator Schumer,
my hope is that the debate will be good for us.
Senator Schumer, do you think there can be an amendment, some kind of change to health care reform?
Well, let me say this. First, we welcome, in a certain sense, their attempt to repeal it, because it gives us a second chance to make a first impression. There are so many good things in the bill. The donut hole, the fact that insurance companies, which can just say you didn't dot the I or cross the T, kick you off. Annual checkups for senior citizens, which save billions. Dr. Coburn knows how important preventative medicine is. And so many other good things that didn't get a real airing during the Sturm and Drang of the debate will now get one. And there are some changes we can work on together. Repealing the 1099 provision, which puts too big a burden on small business. And what Dr. Coburn said, getting rid of, the bill did a good job, but it can go further in getting rid of the duplication, the inefficiencies in this system. We have the best healthcare system in the world and the most inefficient. And if we can work together on cutting those costs without damaging the good health care that people get, that's an area for bipartisan agreement, I think.
All right, final question here about what Eric Cantor in the House, a Republican leader, called a leverage moment for the Republicans on the debt ceiling. It has to be raised. We have to keep borrowing money even though we're so deep in debt. Republican Senator Schumer want to exact a promise on a certain amount of spending cuts before they vote to raise that ceiling. Do you think that agreement can be reached?
Well, first, I think using the threat of not renewing the debt ceiling is like playing with fire. If we didn't renew the debt ceiling, our soldiers and veterans wouldn't be paid, Social Security checks wouldn't go out, and worst of all, we might permanently threaten confidence of the credit markets in the dollar, which could create a recession worse than the one we have now, or even a depression. So that is playing with fire, and I was glad to see that both Speaker Boehner and Eric Cantor said they're not going to use that as a threat. We are going to have to come together on spending. There is no question about it. And we Democrats agree there ought to be spending cuts. In the appropriation that came up last year, late last year, the McCaskill-Sessions proposal, bipartisan, to cut spending considerably lower than was originally proposed in the budget, was supported. But you can't just do it willy-nilly across the board. There are some things that changed since 2008 and need to be funded.
Senator Coburn, does it have to be a specific amount in cuts before you vote to raise the ceiling?
I think for me it does. I've had conversations with the president. Look, the debt ceiling, we had warnings last week from the rating agencies that we're going to get a downgrade in our bonds. A debt ceiling non-increase is nothing compared to what's going to happen to us if we don't address the real issues facing our country. The CBS poll out this morning, 77% of the people in this country believe we need to cut the spending significantly. Only 9% say we need to raise taxes. The fact is I believe the president and the bipartisan majority in both houses know that we can come together before the debt ceiling and reach an agreement that says here's where we're going to be and here's what we must do to send the signal to the international financial community. If in fact we don't raise the debt ceiling, that won't be near the catastrophe that if in fact the bond vigilantes come after the U.S. government bonds in the next 2 to 3 years. Right. We will have such bigger pain than not raising the debt limit.
I will make that the last word. Senators, thank you both very much. And coming up,
good to be with you.
More of the state of political discourse in this country. Might we see a return to civility in Arizona?